Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining the Ohio Urban Forestry Program's 2020 Conference Series, brought to you by the U.S. Forest Service's Adobe Connect platform. I'm Tyler Stevenson, Ohio's Urban Forestry Coordinator, and I'd like to welcome all of you on behalf of our 6 regional urban foresters. This is our 5th and final session of the conference series, and we're so very happy that so many of you have been able to join us for some, if not all, of the presentations over this past month. I'm really looking forward to today's speakers and topics, so without further ado, I'm going to turn it over to today's moderator, our Northwest Ohio Urban Forester, Stephanie Miller. Take it away, Steph. Steph, you're on mute.
Thank you very much, Tyler. I'm sorry about that, everybody. But welcome, everybody, to our finale of the conference series. We're really grateful that you're taking time to join us this morning and hope that you're enjoying learning with us. Before we get started, we have a few housekeeping tips for you. If you're having trouble hearing, adjust the speaker at the top left of your screen. It looks like a little red megaphone. If you're still having trouble, you can click on your computer's volume or speaker icon on the bottom right of your toolbar. It looks like a little megaphone too. And to enlarge the presentation screen, click on the small square made of arrows in the middle right of your top menu. If you experience feedback or a slow connection, you may call in using the numbers on the screen. They'll also be in the Q&A box as well, so you can still see those once we're finished with this screen. The question and answer box, the Q&A box, is available throughout the program, so you can type in questions and we'll share them with the presenters at the end of each session. The raising your hand tab is not configured for these presentations, so all the questions need to be typed in the Q&A box rather than raising your hand. Everybody who's registered will receive a video link to the presentations once this conference series wraps, so it'll be a few weeks. And you can watch them at your convenience over and over again in your pajamas and your slippers. For all certified arborists and certified foresters, you'll earn credits with the completion of each session. And you supplied your certification number at registration, so we'll take care of all of that at the end of the conference series. But you need to watch them live. Next Wednesday morning, September 30th at 9 o'clock, we'll have a really casual, laid-back, virtual coffee clutch to wrap up the series. So it'll be a chance to chat in person with all of us urban foresters and other attendees from the conference, and a good opportunity for you to provide a little more feedback, maybe than what you did in the evaluations, and what we could do better in the future for a future educational event. So tune in to chat, or you can just listen if you like.
Hey, Steph.
And now, yes.
Could you pull your mic away from your mouth just a little bit? We're getting a lot of comments about a muffler.
Sure. You betcha. How is that? Is that better? All right, great. Well, we're delighted to welcome Sarah Anderson, Senior Manager of Career Pathways with American Forests, the oldest national nonprofit forestry conservation organization in the United States. She's here to help continue Ohio's discussion on tree equity in our communities. Sarah's work focuses on equipping urban forestry stakeholders to build and retain a diverse, qualified, and representative workforce. Previously, she ran Lily Leaf Solutions, LLC, a consulting firm that helped urban greening stakeholders address equity, access, inclusion, and justice in their work. Sarah's experience includes developing and administering national urban forestry programs, managing consistent engagement for urban tree and city park associations, and facilitating local and national conferences. Sarah has a dual bachelor's degree in urban and environmental studies and a certificate in geographic information systems from the University of Pittsburgh, and a master's degree is in public administration from Bowie State University. Sarah has a whole lot to share, so without any further ado, Sarah, the floor is yours.
Sarah, you're on mute.
Tyler, thank you so much, Steph, for that introduction. Wanted to ask to make sure that everyone can see my screen, the presentation.
Yep, we can see it.
Okay, wonderful. Hopefully you're able to see the slide here. All right. So good morning, everybody. Thank you so much for tuning in to learn a little bit more about tree equity, and I'm excited to join you all and talk about how American Forest is working to achieve tree equity through our urban work all over the country. So, and hopefully we'll get into how that can apply to your communities in Ohio. So, American Forest is the nation's oldest national conservation nonprofit. We were founded back in 1875, and we were founded basically after the Civil War. There were lots of land grants out to men, mostly white men, who are moving west. And so what happened was folks were cutting down trees left and right to actually build homes and communities, and there was no regulation, and so there were lots of fires that were happening, and it was just a mess. Like, America's forests were a mess in that like really serious phase of expansion and urbanization of folks moving westward. And so a bunch of folks got together and called a Continental Forest Congress and said, you know what, we need some regulations. We need to make sure that the forests that we are using for all kinds of sustenance get replenished and that they are protected. And so that began the genesis of American Forest. And out of the Second Continental Forest Congress came the Forest Service. So we've had a relationship with the federal government since the very beginning. We helped to create the Forest Service, and we now do a lot of work to support federal and state and municipal urban forest management and forest management on the whole. So we have two departments. We have a kind of rural lands department and an urban, and I work in our urban forestry department, of course. And so the picture on your left here on the slide is actually of First Lady Florence Harding planting trees. She was one of our board members during her husband's administration. And the picture on the right, I don't know if any of you have been around as long to remember City Green, but this platform was the iTree precursor that American Forest pioneered in the 90s, the late 90s and early 2000s. And so we have been committed to urban forests since the very beginning of urban forestry, about a little bit more than 100 years ago. And we wrote the book on shading our cities. This came out in 1984, and it was a great resource if anybody wanted to nerd out more about best practices in urban forestry management. And it's funny, I actually have a copy with me, and I've been digging into it as time allows. And there's a lot in there that actually predicts where we are now, you know, predicting some of the challenges that we face now, which is fascinating. So,
Sarah?
Yeah?
Hey, Sarah?
Yeah?
Sorry to interrupt you. Can you hear me? Could you click on the down arrow next to your mic and turn up your volume? If you click the down arrow and then hit adjust microphone. And we won't be able to hear you when you're adjusting it.
Is this any better?
Yes.
Okay, excellent.
Thank
Excellent.
you. Sorry.
No, all good. Want to make sure everybody is hearing me loud and clear. So thank you for that. So again, we've been advancing urban forest management over the past about 100 years. I think most scholars say that the genesis of urban forestry management began around the 1910s, kind of within the Industrial Revolution, kind of at the tail end when folks realized, oh wow, everybody lives in these cities, and we really need to make sure that people have access to nature, that folks can get a reprieve from what were cities that were filled with lots of dirt and smog and things like that. So that's us. All right, so I kind of went over a little bit of the history so you all have context of why American Forest is how we came about, our investment in urban forestry, and now this is kind of our overarching goal. So our urban forestry department is structured in order to work to achieve tree equity. So that's our North Star, that's our goal. And so I'll get into a little bit more about that soon, but so that you have an understanding of how we're laid out, we work to achieve tree equity at 3 different levels. We work just kind of coming down the tree, or I'll work from the bottom up, explain from the bottom up. So we innovate new tools, new initiatives, pilot projects, all kinds of research, and we see what works and we see what doesn't. So all that we do is science-backed and data-driven. And so what we do is we have several different initiatives, including the one that I lead for us, which is the Career Pathways Initiative, that is basically trying to figure out solutions for optimized urban forest management. And once we've vetted that method, whatever that tool is or the new project, we test it out via the next level, which is our place-based partnerships. So we have many different, I think we have 22 community relief cities where we work across the country. We have 1 or 2 states where we've worked with statewide urban forestry, work to implement or create statewide urban forestry strategies for management, which has been coordinated. And when we've tested out our tools and our methods, we make sure that they work, we make sure that they're applicable and can then be replicable in other places. We then roll that up into our movement building work, which benefits the whole, not just those 22 cities, but the whole rest of the country, and potentially sometimes the world. We also do, all of the things that we create that are publicly accessible are accessible just to everybody. So we've had folks share with us that they've used guides on Vibrant Cities Lab. They've attended some of the professional development events that we have. Maybe they've modeled their own policies off of how we do our policy and advocacy work. Anyway, we're about building an entire movement to get to tree equity. And so what is tree equity, right? What even is this concept? Tree equity is making sure that everybody has the benefits of trees. It's quite, it looks like folks are saying that I have some microphone issues. Hopefully you all are able to hear me. If need be, I can call in as well. So I'll let you wait for direction on that. But if you look at a map of pretty much any U.S. city, the darker parts of these cities indicate high heat levels and also indicate, with the lighter green, low tree canopy cover. And you can find that in pretty much any large U.S. city, all over the country, including in Ohio. And so one of the things that we noticed about that is, one, it's unfair, right? It's unjust. We want to make sure that everybody is prepared to face, high heat levels, or can benefit from the insulation, benefits that trees provide. I mean, you all are tree professionals, so you all probably already, I'm preaching to the choir on the benefits of trees here. But to have an issue that's so pervasive, it means that it requires significant tools and strategies and policies to overcome it. And the origin of why our tree canopy cover is so inequitable as it stands right now is because of discriminatory housing and planning practices that were legal for many, many years, almost 100 years. And there's some great research about this. Oh, hey, Tyler. We're going to fix some mic issues.
I am so sorry to interrupt.
All good.
Yeah, I am so sorry. Could you maybe just turn it down a bit? I'm not sure if it's maybe you're either too close to it or it was just turned up too much.
Okay, do we have the sweet spot? Is this a little bit better? I hope it works.
It sounded good to me. I'm looking at some comments here from other folks. Yeah, I'm getting a lot of yeses. So keep going. If I have to interrupt again, I'm sorry. We want to hear what you're saying now.
You know what? Technology is not perfect. Okay, it is flawed, just like we humans. So I'm good with making adjustments on the fly. All right. So sure. So the reason we have inequitable tree canopy cover in most of our major cities is because of discriminatory housing and planning practices. After World War II, even actually before World War II, in the 1920s and 30s, the Homeowners Loan Corporation was a federal agency that that authorized funding to potential homeowners, right, to grant mortgages and home loans so that folks could get their life started. And it was a big, I think it was maybe founded after it was part of the New Deal. And what ended up happening was the Homeowners Loan Corporation actually graded different neighborhoods on being ideal to live in, right? On places where they would absolutely grant and encourage folks to live, so where they would grant out mortgages. Places that were pretty desirable still, places that were declining, and places that were hazardous. And the folks who were awarded these loans, these home loans, were largely, white men. That's who got these home loans of a certain class. And so everybody else was relegated, for the most part, to these other neighborhoods. Immigrant populations, disabled folks, folks of color, Native people, anybody who was poor, right? Everybody who was not in this certain demographic was pretty much it was legal to just not give them home loans, or say, oh, well, you have to live in these less desirable or hazardous areas. And so what you see is the places that were graded as the best areas to be actually correlate with places where there's highest tree canopy cover now. And it's because, just like housing, trees are infrastructure. They just happen to be green infrastructure. And so infrastructure development, investments, repairs, maintenance, all of those have been concentrated in areas that have been deemed, going way back to this, the Homeowners Loan Corporation back into the 30s, all of that investment was concentrated in areas that had already had investment or were greater than desirable to begin with. And so that's the genesis of correlating great quality, well cared for tree canopy and other areas that have, that weren't technically hazardous, right, that have barely any trees, right? So we know that this reinforced feedback loops between folks who have, housing, affluence, race, trees. It's also, you can tell it when it comes to schools and libraries and other kinds of infrastructure in the urban environment as well. And so when you have that, you also see disparities, like I mentioned on the last slide, as they pertain to urban heat. And so it's great in the Q&A. I think we were able to see the link to the NPR story where some of these graphics were taken from, and we can follow up with some of these links to these studies as well for reference. So if our tree canopy is inherently unequal because of these policies, right, then what do we do to get it to be more equal? If it's inherently inequitably distributed, how do we get to tree equity? Well, we envision everybody to be able to live in a place where they are getting the health, wealth, and then climate resilience benefits that we know a well cared for and mature tree canopy provides. And so back to our way of how we get there, right? Now that you all have the context of how we got to the place where we are now, I'm going to start off going down the tree, talking a little bit about our movement building work. I'll go through an example of our place-based partnerships, and I'll get to the innovation lab at the end here. So before I get into that, I want to take a pause and ask you, what does tree equity mean in your area? So all of the factors I had mentioned that correlate with low or high tree canopy cover, affluence, possibly race, definitely infrastructure investments in the built environment. It could be employment, right, and just straight income. Think about some of the factors in your community that you think may correlate with lower canopy cover, or where you feel like you may have the biggest backlog of maintenance. You may have folks who don't have the disposable income to hire certified arborists to do quality care and repairs and maintenance, so they're running higher risk because maybe there's issues from pests and disease that have ravaged their community. But once you take a moment and think about that, and maybe jot down a couple notes on where you would get started to work to achieve true equity in your community, and maybe one of the factors I have here is proximity to environmental burden. Often that is actually the definition of environmental injustice. Environmental injustice is bearing a disproportionate environmental burden without the requisite inputs to correct it. So think about those things, and maybe that can help shade how you hear some of the ways that American Forest is working to achieve tree equity. in other areas. All right, so from the top of the tree down, I'll go through some of the examples of how we're working to achieve true equity. This is kind of moonshot federal legislation, but if any of you have heard of the Green New Deal, American Forest is kind of behind writing the forestry section of that, just so that we have the big ask of what could be done and what needs to get done in order for us to achieve true equity on a grand scale. So we have put together the Climate Stewardship Act with bipartisan support, and Title II of that act is on forests, and we have a whole section just dedicated to urban forestry, which I'm just like, this is the best, and we've proposed to plant 400 million new city trees by 2030 or by 2050, with the first 100 million getting planted in the next decade, which is aggressive, we know, but we got to start somewhere, and that language has now then been adopted in the Replant Act, the Trees Act, and I know that we have a reforestation. It's like a reforestation. I'm forgetting the title now of it, but this language as a template has then been adopted into many other pieces of legislation, and that's the goal, is for pieces of this to get adopted and hopefully put through, which would then put us in a way better position than we have been, which is, we've been doing okay, but we definitely need more investment. Oops. And so on the more reasonable note, not the moonshot legislation, we have worked to advance forest policy by increasing the National Urban and Community Forestry funding to $32 million for this past fiscal year. It was previously $28 million, so we did get a $5 million increase, which was huge. And that money goes directly to states. That money actually supports the Ohio Urban Forestry, Department of Natural Resources staffing. That money supports statewide urban forest councils. That money supports grants out to communities, technical assistance, delivery. It supports research and all kinds of municipal efforts. And so we are in DC, and we are working to continue to push. I think our last ask was $50 million for the urban forestry budget, and we got up to 32. So we're going to keep aggressively pushing to continue to rise the tide that lifts all boats in our field. Coming down the tree to the place-based partnerships, part of how we get to tree equity. Here are some of the priority locations where we work, where we have active community relief partnerships. Each of the places that is a city, these are places that we've partnered on our community relief program, which is the urban program, where we've worked in a place-based capacity. We've advanced some kind of citywide partnership for better urban forest management. We've given grants to local nonprofits that are doing great work to advocate and plant trees. And then the landscapes themselves, these are areas where our friends in the rural department, where they're working to restore natural forested landscapes and habitat in particular areas. So what do we do when we actually reach out to one of these cities or locations? We actually follow the city partnership model, where we build partnerships, like I mentioned before. We plan guided by science, which I've also mentioned. All of what we do is data-driven and science-backed. We do advocacy and funding. We often bring funding to the table and help apply for new grants. We actually do the work of helping to plant and restore forests. We administer that, and then we communicate and replicate about the outcomes. And so, you all are thinking about adopting pieces of this model, or if you thought, well, how would we ever work with American forests? This is what we would be offering. This is kind of the suite of services that we offer to our local partners. And so this is one example of how we've advanced the cause for tree equity in one particular location. So this is our change model that revolves around San Francisco. So these are all the actions we've taken around the change model to advance tree equity there. We hosted a global climate action summit last fall. We have, there's a little bit of background, San Francisco, and this might be a point that you all may or may not relate to. For years, San Francisco left their street tree maintenance to the adjacent property owners. And so because of that, it exacerbated the inequitable canopy cover and inequitable maintenance, because places that were poor in the city are places that were managed by property managers who were absent or vacant, or areas that were richer. You could completely tell whether folks had disposable income or not, or were going to prioritize managing their street trees or not, which then has lots of course, risk and safety implications for passersby on a sidewalk, or folks who are parking their cars adjacent to these street trees, or sewer and utility line management underneath of the ground, or power lines above the trees, right? So you can see how it would be ideal for the city to actually take responsibility for all of the street trees, and that's exactly what they did. So we helped them do that, and we're helping them transition their canopy management systems to adopt that responsibility, which will help achieve tree equity, because it will help. They're prioritizing some of the street trees that are in areas where they were not getting as much love and care, and they can prioritize then doing pit cuts and planting new trees and providing the requisite early care so that those trees can get established, because San Francisco is extremely densely populated. So things like that, like really tangible things that, and so we helped with fund planting there. We have, helped host a street tree summit there. And we also helped to innovate new ways of finding long-term maintenance funding, which we know is the hardest thing ever, through our partner, City Forest Credits. So if any of you have heard of carbon credits, or like the carbon market, you can basically bundle up all the benefits, quantify all the benefits that trees provide, and you can sell them as carbon credits to different buyers. And the cost, of course, or the benefits that urban trees provide, of course, in my opinion, far outweigh the benefits. Not maybe they don't far outweigh, but you're going to get more for your money benefits-wise if you plant a tree in an urban place than if you plant one tree in the middle of a forest someplace. That requires like much larger scale, like planting and whatnot. But the benefits to people, right, because people are in proximity of urban trees, are really noticeable and, in my opinion, more immediate. So the carbon credits for urban trees cost way more than they cost for trees out in forest, which is great because that money then goes to long-term maintenance of that urban tree to make sure that the benefits that it's providing are yielded. So yeah, if you have more questions about carbon credits and city forest credits, I can answer those at the end. But this is an example of what we've done to help kind of advance tree equity in one location through the change model. So I'm going to pause again here, give you a lot of information, and ask you who would be a key tree equity partner for you. So we talked a little bit about where would you get started to work on tree equity in your community. Where would be your pinpointed place, your priority location. And now I'm asking, okay, if you're going to go get started and do some work in this particular location, would your message be most attractive to folks who are looking to improve health outcomes or environmental just advocacy in general, folks who are looking for economic improvement, or maybe folks who are looking to advance workforce development and looking to get people into jobs. Having partners, as you all know, because you all do this work day in, day out locally, is critical to long-term success and to making sure that a lot of other folks are bought in and are then spreading the message of tree equity as well. And so, if you were interested in maybe partnering with folks on, let's take workforce development for an example, I'm going to get into a little bit how you would do that. So, reminder, coming back to the tree, we're now down at the innovation lab level. We went over movement building and place-based partnerships. And so this is the initiative in the innovation lab level that I actually run for American Forest. So we know that just like those maps where we saw that there's an overlay between low tree canopy cover and lower income areas, those areas also have higher unemployment. And we thought a couple years back, why don't we just employ the folks who live in low canopy cover areas to plant and care for the trees in those areas? Then they can be sustainably employed. About a quarter of tree trimmers and pruners are self-employed, and so there's an opportunity here to become entrepreneurs and have kind of an entrepreneurial spirit about it, which is great. It's hard work. It's not, especially at the entry level, running a crew or becoming a tree trimmer and pruner. But these are good jobs that pay family-sustaining wages. We're almost up, I think, to around $20 an hour being the average wage for somebody who is entry-level doing tree trimming and pruning work in our field. So with almost no experience needed and required, and only like a month, maybe 2 months of on-the-job training necessary, this, us trying to achieve tree equity goes hand in hand with us delivering economic benefits to those who are in low canopy cover areas. So what American Forest has been working on, what I've been working on at American Forest, I should say, is basically optimizing an urban forest career pathway and making sure that folks can be engaged in their communities, doing, touch through the work that you all are doing, which is fantastic, funneled through pre-apprenticeship programs and into either further education through 2 or 4 year schools, or that can be hired right by industry right after they go through a job training program. And so we have run some pilot projects where with some partnerships, corporate partnerships, and partnering with the industry itself to advance these causes, this work. So this is kind of the place-based partnerships portion of the work. So we're elevating career pathways up to that place-based partnerships level now, which is exciting. And so what we found is there's amazing, huge demand for workers, and it doesn't have to take very long for folks to get trained and get put into jobs. So we're really excited. We've helped to place, I think, at least 5 people into urban forestry jobs out of the 6 cities where we've had pilots thus far. And we are scaling that up dramatically in the coming years. And so you can learn more about our work on career pathways and many, many more topics on vibranttcitieslab.com, which is the site that we co-run with the Forest Service. And it's basically the hub for all things urban forestry. And so if you are in the market for starting from scratch on how do I even optimize my urban forest management, or how do I even get started on any of this work, Vibrant Cities Lab has fantastic resources for you to get started with. So there's our Career Pathways Action Guide. There's a new urban wood reuse action guide as well. We know that because of pests and diseases, there's been a ton of decline for our urban trees. You know, emerald ash borer, Asian milkworm beetle. In some places in the country, oak wilt, and you know, spotted lanternfly, and I mean, there's just, it goes on, right? The threats to our urban forests, but the opportunity on the back end for that is reuse. And so Baltimore actually has a really fantastic urban wood reuse economy. And I'm excited that the coming year we're going to be building out an urban wood reuse career pathway there as well. So looking forward to connecting, you know, from nurseries to urban wood reuse, the whole spectrum of benefits that trees provide, and extending those benefits to help achieve tree equity. And so you can get started with our Urban Forestry Toolkit. So in the top right-hand corner of the webpage, when you go to vibranttcitieslab.com, you'll be able to click on Urban Forestry Toolkit, and this is what will come up. It's a few different steps, and wherever you are, you know, I'm sure that the folks at the OhioDNR who work on urban forestry, the original urban foresters, will be glad to help walk you through this, and you know, making sure that you have all the tools that you need to optimize your urban tree canopy so that everybody can benefit, especially those who hadn't necessarily been receiving those benefits in the past. And so that's my presentation. I welcome questions that you may have. The Q&A in the chat was lit, so I'm excited about conversing with you all and hearing more about what your thoughts are on implementing tree equity in Ohio communities, what your challenges are, and hopefully we have some resources at, you know, via Vibrant Cities Lab, or you know, other research or policies that can be good examples and can be helpful for you all to advance your work. So thank you so much for having me. I'm thrilled again to be here, and hoping that I can have an excuse to come to Ohio a little bit later, maybe next year when things are safe again. So thank you again.
Wonderful. Thank you, Sarah. Can you hear me okay? I'm not garbled this time? Good. I'm glad I'm not garbled. Wonderful. Well, thank you very much for your knowledge and experience. And we do have some great questions. So I'm going to start with a big one from Franklin. what is redlining? Can you explain that? And also, what has that meant, and why is it so important to us in urban forestry today?
Fantastic question. So, all right. So, actually, I'm going to go ahead and share my screen because that I can answer that question probably best from that slide. So here we go. We'll go back. Back to redlining. So redlining is the practice of it's a kind of slang term or like colloquial term for discriminatory housing practices that were legal. So basically, if you were, I'll just use an example. So if I was going, of course, with a man, right, probably with a husband or somebody, to like go and get a home loan, right, because women couldn't even have credit cards at this time. So if we were going to go to get a home loan back in the 30s and the 40s, realtors would draw a red line around the area that we would be allowed to live in. And outside of that red line, we would not be able to look. We'd be confined to that particular area. Why? Because we're black. Because we're not, like well-to-do or coming from well-to-do families that are white. It was legal to discriminate against anybody who was like a non-white man. And like Protestant, I don't know if you've heard of WASP, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant. If you were not those things, it was totally fine. If you were Jewish, if you were Armenian, if you were anything other than that, it was totally fine. The government would back you up on discriminating against those folks and then relegating them to only live in less desirable areas. So the practice became known as redlining because that's literally what realtors would do. They would draw a red line and they would say, this is where you can live. And for other folks, they would use that red line to say, yeah, you don't really want to live over here. You want to live in these other places, these A-graded areas, right? These areas that we know are going to then correlate with having more trees. And so there were a couple studies done that compared 37 different cities. This study out of Yale, and there was another study done that compared 108 cities, and they all found this same concept where areas that had been redlined were hotter, had less trees, had higher unemployment, had higher asthma rates, had higher, it's like if you draw a map of income and you're drawing a map of tree canopy cover, you're oftentimes drawing a map of race in ways that transcend income. And yeah, that's this is the result of our tree canopy cover right now as a result of redlining. I hope that that's helpful.
Yeah. Yeah, and Sarah, I'd like to add to that the original redlining was done by the U.S. government. It was done by the federal government to categorize neighborhoods. So if you had a neighborhood that had any immigrants or any people of color, they were automatically considered a hazardous neighborhood, all the way up to a good neighborhood, which were primarily white, wealthier folks. And so you had the 4 categories. And so that categorization by the federal government was then used by the insurance companies later on in different sections. It happened a lot after World War II. Soldiers came back who got the home loans. We saw white flight as a result of that, and leaving behind what was integrated neighborhoods to be folks who weren't able to get those loans, like what Sarah said. So It's had catastrophic results for decades, but it was started by federal government initiative. Well, thank you. And I'm going to add in there that, and we'll share this, one of the urbans can share that Terry Robeson shared one of the New York Times, a recent article about redlining, which is really, really fabulous. A question from Kate. When was the Climate Stewardship Act Title II passed?
So it has not been passed. It is proposed legislation, but this often happens with legislation where you ask for, you know that it's going to get cut down a lot, and I don't know, it's not as probably dramatic working with policy locally, but there's still always negotiation and refinements and, you know, ideological back and forth. But I wanted to share this as an example of big moonshot legislation, and this is the text that we included basically we submitted the Climate Stewardship Act as the forestry section of the Green New Deal. And so this language has made it into lots of folks' campaigns. It's made it into several different bipartisan pieces of legislation within the House, within the Senate. And so we have funds on workforce, funds supporting workforce development, funds supporting maintenance backlogs in urban communities and cities. And so it has not been passed, but these are our asks because, 84% of Americans live in developed urbanized areas, whether they're urban or suburban. So we know that the need is great. And so we have passed, though, the urban community forestry funding, and we are close to passing many, many more pieces. I know that the Replant Act did get adopted by the House. We're still pushing that in the Senate, but I'd be happy to follow up with the team, the state team, to update you all on some of the latest policies that we've been working on, or where some of those live, because it's important. It's important to know what support is out there, and a lot of what we've been pushing would facilitate grant support to local communities, like the ones that you all work in. So, yeah, just wanted to give you a picture of where we're hoping to go and what we're working on.
Great. We have a follow-up question to that one. From Christine, $32 million is not much money for 50 states. Do you have lobbying groups to help get funding, and who pays for that if you do?
So we are a 501c3, and we have like maybe 1 or 2 people on staff who are official lobbyists. So that's us. We do work in coalition with other national forestry groups. Tyler just put in the chat there the Sustainable Urban Forestry Coalition. We work with them and are a very active member to advance urban forestry policy and better legislation nationally. We work with the U.S. Climate Alliance, which is, we like to kind of steward them, to steward their forestry work at least, which is a collection of, I think, maybe 23 states or 28 states that once our current president dropped out of the Paris Climate Accords, the U.S. Climate Alliance states said, okay, we're still going to go ahead and try to, make our state in accordance with the prior commitment. And so we help them on their forestry strategies and optimizing all their forested lands, urban and rural, to help get in alignment with that, with those accords. So yeah, we work to advance policies and funding nationally, but also locally. But yes, $32 million is not enough at all. We actually have kind of an internal policy memo of like, what's our whole wish list, you guys? Like, what's our whole wish list around everything urban if we could get everything that we ever wanted? And it's many more times $32 million for that timeline number, and forgetting what it is, but I think it's like 200 or 300 million or something enormous. So yeah, we need a lot more funds, but we're working on it.
Thank you. Thank you. On behalf of Ohio, thank you. A quick follow-up with that. Are you working with the National League of Cities to elevate their advocacy in your portfolio?
That's a great question. They are a member of SUSC, the Sustainable Urban Forestry Coalition. So we do work with them on advancing, to advance urban forestry. We don't have a formal external, like just one-on-one partnership with them, but we do work with them via the Sustainable Urban Forestry Coalition work.
Great. Here's one from Lawrence. What are the health and economic consequences of living in areas with substantially fewer trees?
Oh man, yeah.
I'll give you 2 hours for that.
It's a laundry list, Lawrence. Thank you for asking that question. There's been so many studies. One of the things why don't I go ahead and do this? I'm going to go ahead and just point you toward a couple of the areas of resources that can be helpful in this way. So let me go ahead and share my screen. Right. So hopefully you're able to see. This is the homepage for Vibrant Cities Lab. So when you go to vibranttcitieslab.com, this is where you'll come. So if you go to research, case studies, and guides, hopefully it is readable here. Just made it a little bit bigger, so hopefully everybody can read it. If you go to research, case studies, and guides, there's going to be a menu that comes out from the left-hand side of the screen, and you can look at human health, and you can look at social impact, mental impact, physical impact, and a slew of case studies that can shed some light on helping to answer some of your questions. But the short answer is it's not good. Sustained living in areas where there's less tree canopy cover. I don't know. I always think about it as like we're humans and we're also primates, right? We're actually animals at the end of the day, and you would never put an animal in a zoo in a bunch of concrete. You would never do that, right? You would make sure it was green. You would make sure it replicated that animal's natural habitat and environment as much as possible. But we expect people to live in concrete areas, and we expect them to be fine. But like, it's inherently stressful for us because it's not our natural environment. We're animals, just like every other animal, and we need nature. So there are some more, detailed studies about that. As you can see, there's a slew of other areas of focus too, where you can get some good research as well. Yeah, lots of stuff. So hopefully that's helpful. Sorry I didn't answer it specifically, but it's a very long answer.
Right, thank you. Let me see here. We have a couple related to fire. How do the fires around the country in the world affect carbon credits? And what happens when the forest is gone?
You said, how did the fire...
if someone is trying to buy credits. Oh, okay. Yeah, everything froze.
That's a great question. I'm not sure. I'm not sure how the fires would... I know that the fires are mostly happening in rural communities and right at the rural wildland or the wildland urban interface, WUI, for like those in the loop. I'm not sure. That's a great question. I can check with my colleagues who are working on this. I know I had a colleague who had to evacuate. She's based in California. I don't know.
Yeah, it's a complicated.
I'm not as familiar with the carbon market. Yeah, I'm unsure about how the carbon credit market works outside of urban tree, like urban forests. Yeah, it's a whole thing. I can check with my my colleagues. That's a great question.
All right, thank you. Here's one from William. Specifically, what can I do as a white tree advocate to get Black homeowners and landlords to buy into a tree planting program?
That's a fantastic question. So you're asking about allyship, and you're asking about activism, and kind of there's a lot in there, right? So if you just think about it, people who are not, white Anglo-Saxon Protestant, middle or upper class men, everybody else has had a journey in this country to establishing and restoring trust with every institution that at one point or another discriminated against them. And so, you can, as a white tree advocate, looking to make a difference and looking to get other groups interested in a tree canopy cover, start there. Start with whatever the current relationship is with that institution. So if you represent an institution, say you represent the local city, and the city's maybe been making promises that they haven't been able to keep. And that's one of the reasons why there's no trust, or there's gentrification going on in your area, and so folks feel like they're being pushed out. Get to know, Dr. Christine Carmichael does great work on this. She calls it heritage narratives. So to get to know the heritage narrative that whatever the population that you're looking to work with, so you're saying Black, homeowners and potentially also renters, get to know the narratives that they're working with. Understand what they are, what their history and the stories that they've been telling themselves about who they can trust. What are those stories? Because once you know what those are, then you can start to meet them, start working on them, but, from where they are, instead of necessarily thinking, well, trees are great, trees are the best, like, we should just convince everybody that trees are ideal. Well, not everybody's maybe ready to hear that, or willing to hear that, or believes that, because the folks who maybe are sharing that story with them represent institutions where they don't have any trust, that they don't have any trust in yet. So, or where their trust has been decimated by other kinds of limiting factors. So yeah, we get to know what stories and narratives they're working with and telling each other and affirming. And that happens first by listening and then repeating back what you've heard to say, is that correct? Is this what I'm hearing? I'm only seeking to understand. And then after a period of listening and understanding, then comes, okay, I've heard their issues or complaints or frustrations, whether it comes to like maintenance or, fears around crime or any other concerns. And then you offer just one or maybe two immediate or kind of shorter term solutions. And then you start to build the trust back up again. That you representing a shade tree commission or a local advocacy group or a statewide entity even are going to do what you say you're going to do, and that you can be trusted. And that's extremely powerful. And it's through those kinds of small acts that we then regain trust and build back stronger communities. That's where I would start. I know that I do that all the time in my work. I'm rarely talking about the benefits that trees provide to all the employers that I'm talking to who I'm trying to convince to hire Black and brown youth, immigrants, all kinds of folks who maybe have faced barriers to employment in the past. Because the employers don't care about the benefits of trees. The employers care about having somebody who's reliable. And so I listened for a while, I met them where they are, and now I'm trying to offer immediate solutions, more short-term solutions to helping them build up their workforces, which in the grand scheme of things, builds our resilience as a forestry sector and helps us care long-term for our trees.
Great, thank you.
I hope that's helpful.
Yes. All right, we have a question from Katie. Are there any examples or case studies of how colleges or universities can collaborate around urban forestry equity?
Ooh, around urban forestry equity in particular? I'm thinking there's tons of case studies on how colleges have great programs, or colleges have pioneered some interesting studies on urban forestry. But advancing urban forestry equity. I would have to think about that. I'm not aware of any college outside of Southern University or I think Tennessee, University of Tennessee at Knoxville has done some good work on this, where they had the active programs to recruit folks of color into the field. They have like scholarships available, and some of the work that they have funded and done examines discrepancies in tree canopy. It examines tree inequity and works on. I know out of Southern, there's been folks who have gone through that program who've done really great things around fruit and nut trees. So like kind of optimizing urban forestry usage for the sustainability of a whole community. That's a really great question. You know who would be helpful with that to give guidance on how the university can play a better role in advancing urban forest equity? Two entities. One, whatever regional urban forest, the Forest Service Research Station, they would be great resources to help kind of illustrate the trends in the region and help the university students not just have a data background on like being familiar with, you know, what's happening in like the larger region, but, you know, and maybe examples of success or whatever, but they'd be able to then provide actual like research like direction. And I don't know, I feel like the Forest Service research stations are not, they're not, to me, an underutilized resource in our field, and they're great. The other entity that could be helpful from the university standpoint is making sure that the university has representation on the areas or the municipality, whichever municipality or county, whatever the jurisdiction is where the university is, has representation on the Shade Tree Commission or on the municipal tree board or whatever, and having that person kind of maybe rotate out being a student or being a faculty member or being both. That university, I'm sure, would have a huge stake and then say in how the urban forest gets managed, given that usually university towns thrive because of the universities. So I could see that being very advantageous, not just in helping pinpoint any kind of inequity going on, but also helping to rectify it. And yeah, anyway, those are just two ideas. Hopefully those are helpful.
Yeah, I think it'll be interesting as we have more Tree Campus USAs come up too, and because one of the requirements is they need to work with their communities. So it'll be interesting to see what comes of that. I think we have time for one more question, and we have plenty more, so whatever's left we'll get at the end of the day with Alan. We still have time at the end. This is from Janet. To compare in wetlands regulations, certain levels of wetland destruction triggers requirement for creating new wetlands elsewhere. Could there be a street improvement funding capacity that would provide forestation requirements for nearby neighborhoods?
Absolutely, yes. That is absolutely a thing. So not too far from DC, where we're based, American Forest in Maryland, they have something called the Forest Conservation Act, and as part of that act, there are replanting requirements, and this is probably very common, right, at the municipal and county level, but I think less so at the state level, where there are replanting requirements given development that are required upon developers who have to take out a particular amount of trees or cut down trees to develop, and the requirements on that development or the replanting as a strategy to maintain the amount of tree canopy that has been taken down. Those were quite loose for a long time, and so in recent years the act has been strengthened, which has been wonderful. And instead of folks being able to only plant or be able to plant anywhere, and what used to happen was these developers would just plant in the middle of nowhere and like not ever do maintenance. There was no accountability checks on the back end. It was a mess. There are now requirements on, okay, if you raise a bunch of trees in an urban area, you got to replant in an urban area. And I think statewide policies and efforts, or county-wide policies and efforts that can encompass, removal and then planting, or environmental degradation and destruction given a flood or given anything. If for any reason, tree canopy gets destroyed, there should be replanting requirements. And because, like I had mentioned earlier, that urban trees give so much more, arguably, in benefits to humans because of the proximity. We need to make sure that urban trees that get lost get replaced by urban trees. And so I think there's absolutely precedent for that. I would look at Maryland's Forest Conservation Act, the most recently updated one. I think the legislation or the language passed either in late 2019 or early 2020. I would check that out. That would be a fantastic resource for you as you move forward in proposing legislation like that.
Wonderful. Thank you. Well, it's 10:15. We're going to take a break. And don't close your windows. We're going to do a quick sound check on our side for Alan Seawort's presentation. And then we'll have some music and we'll start right back up at 10:30. So we'll see you then.